Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's the Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 25th of July 2024. I've just recorded this entire video and it didn't have audio. I could cry. Anyway, my tears wouldn't make a difference on this dank, wet summer's day in the UK. What better thing is there to do than speak to the team twice about the same stuff? So here goes. Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. 1,230 personnel lost, high. 11 tanks, higher than average. 26 armoured personnel vehicles, higher than average. 45 artillery systems, over double the average. 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems, depends what they are. 79 vehicles and fuel tanks is a very high number. 11 pieces of special equipment, likewise high. This is a fairly bad day for the Russians. That I think indicates that they are still pushing hard. They're throwing everything in the kitchen sink at the Ukrainians. They know that they need to achieve as much as they possibly can before the end of summer. But at the same time, there's lots of evidence to suggest they are running short of equipment and their personnel is suboptimal. And on the other hand, the Ukrainians are struggling to defend those lines. They need to mobilize. It is just tough for everyone. We look at Andrew Perpetua's loss list. We can see that it's approaching parity, but actually when you take out the surveillance and comms equipment and the Lancets are hitting trees at the bottom, so all those purple ones, most of these pink ones, you'll find that actually the stats are pretty good today. And the other reason is because if you look at the combat asset losses, the Ukrainians have only got 8 on the list and the Russians have about 30. So it's almost 4-to-1 combat asset losses. The difference today is that the Russians, for some reason, don't have many trucks and civilian vehicles on the list, where they normally have a massive load that's probably that long, right? They don't today. And that skews it to making it look like it's a parity, plus you've got all this surveillance and comm and decoy stuff. But actually, and I'm not trying to just make excuses, like literally combat losses are sort of almost 4-to-1. So that is worth understanding. Now, the Ukrainians have lost an air defense system. They've had a damaged Strela 10. Lancet's doing a lot of work here on the electronic warfare front, taking out a couple of EW pieces of kit, a drone launching catapult, a M1 Abrams that have been abandoned, and another tank by Lancet, and all these trees that they've hit, so on and so forth. So Lancets are being used an awful lot. Electronic warfare, I don't know how good that kit is. And the surveillance and likewise, comms equipment, most of it destroyed, but a couple of Starlinks damaged. Sometimes they're just cameras on a stick. Sometimes they're much bigger complexes. A Platson RP3000, for example, sounds like it's a little more than just a camera on a stick. Okay, we have mainly Western equipment in the combat losses, a couple of M1 Abrams abandoned and then hit by drones. You'd hope that they can recover those, but actually quite often, both of them fell into a trench. And this is a problem we see of tanks driving along. You don't want to be out the hatch because it's too dangerous. And as a result, you're only using very constrained visuals. And then you drive into a crater or a ditch and you can't get out. And then you abandon the tank and it just gets hit by drones. Anyway, M113, Senator, Humvee, Western equipment there, but mainly damage in the APCs. But yeah, it's not great to probably lose 2 M1 Abrams there. The Russians have lost a Pantsir S1, and we've got a video of that. That is bad news. Having one of those destroyed, that's a high value hit by Gimlers there, guided multiple launch rocket. So it could be an M270 or a HIMARS, who knows, but it's taken out. Remember, the difference between HIMARS is wheels, 6 pods, M270 tracked 12 pods. So quicker, the wheels can shoot and scoot more quickly, but only has 6 missiles. Moves more slowly, but is actually better on certain terrains with tracks. But it has 12 pods, so there you go. Artillery, some D20s. Look at these track garden sheds, 5 of them, 4 abandoned, and then they'll be hit, no doubt. One of them has been hit by FPV drones already, and another one destroyed here. So quite a lot of destruction for these tanks. Most of them destroyed or abandoned. Likewise for the other equipment, or at least 50%. in terms of the infantry fighting vehicles, BMP 1s, 2s, and 3s, and the APCs being taken out there. So a pretty long list of Russian combat losses there that is going to hurt the Russians, that's for sure. Let's look at some of the other sources. It's worth noting some of these anecdotal sources, but they help to build up a picture, don't they? This is from Medusa, one of the exiled news sources, Russian news sources. Russia's 1st Slavyansk Brigade lost so many soldiers that their relatives refer to it as a Bermuda Triangle. The unit's senior officers, meanwhile, extort money from their subordinates at every turn. So not only is a one particularly pretty famous unit being absolutely decimated, but their senior officers are just using it as an excuse to extort money out of people who are desperate. So yeah, that's not looking good for the Russians there. We have Major Timur Kuziev, who's an artillery unit officer who died. This is back in June the 13th. He's from the Russian 85th Motorized Rifle Division. He was killed when a Ukrainian shell hit the area during an interview. And if you remember, there's a couple of incidences quite close to each other where the Russians lost some propagandists, TV crews and whatnot who were operating. One of them, I think, was operating in a place they shouldn't have been. Anyway, a couple of these crews were lost in quick succession. It turns out that one of them was during an interview of a Russian officer, NTV interview. And so one of the NTV operators, Vadim Kozhin, was killed, and a propagandist, Ivliev, was severely injured, losing an arm, and the officer died in that incident. Now, a lot of reporting on a helicopter that has been lost in the Kaluga region, which is kind of north of Kharkiv, trying to work out whether this could have been shot down by decent air defences put over the border Ukrainian side. I don't know. They're saying it was an engine fire. Helicopter new anti-drone unit crashed in the Russian Kaluga region. The Defense Ministry said that the crew was killed. Number of people on board, as well as their names, that the ministry didn't name. The Mi-28 crew usually consists of 2 or 3 people. So when you lose things like helicopters, it's the experienced pilots and crew members that are often, more important than the helicopter itself if you've got enough helicopters. Cause of crashes, it's thought to be engine failure, or claimed to be by the Russians. During a flight to the point of deployment, the crew detected a fire in the cockpit, writes MASH. According to the Telegram channel, the helicopter was returning from a combat mission in the Bryansk region. So, yeah, that's a high-value bit of kit being lost there, the Russians claiming. Now, soldiers of 79th Brigade repelled one of the largest Russian assaults. I talked about this on my frontline update last night. In total, 57 AFVs. That included 11 tanks, 12 motorcycles and 200 infantrymen attacked from different directions. Russian army simultaneously used 11 tanks, 45 APCs and 1 BMPT Terminator. As a result of the battle, 6 tanks and 7 APCs with infantry were knocked out. All 12 motorbikes were burnt. Russians suffered losses in manpower. 40 were killed, 37 injured. After knocking out the first tanks and armoured vehicles, other vehicles rushed to flee the battlefield. Drone operators finished off the infantry that ran into around the landing sites, running from their knocked out vehicles. So this was a pretty huge attack by all accounts. People claiming it's one of the biggest. Someone was claiming on one of the threads it's spliced together footage from lots of different attacks, but actually you are going to... So something like this, a montage, when you have so many drones operating, especially when you're trying to take out each of these vehicles with drones, it's probably going to be 20 drones in the air. You're going to get a lot of footage. So that unit is going to be splicing together footage from a lot of different sources that will be of the same incident. I mean, it could be them faking you with being different incidents spliced together. I mean, you still got these losses, right, irrespective. Bloody hell, that's what happens when my fingers just go bleh. Anyway, that is a really big attack that was met with, it seems, successful Ukrainian defense. I don't know whether it resulted in the Russians taking any land eventually. We shall see, I guess. Our total count of visually documented Russian T-72 losses during their 2022 invasion of Ukraine has exceeded 1,500, says Jakub Janovsky. So Jakub Janovsky is he's a guy that does Oryx these days, and just the T-72 variants, 1,519 of those. I mean, that's like well over 5 times the entire UK tank infantry. And that's just T-72s that the Russians have lost in this war, visually confirmed. There'll be more than that in terms of T-72 losses. Spartan News, who every day tots up the Russian losses and then gives each of the categories a monetary value there. Very useful. Go and check out Spartan News on Twitter. But he said here, USSR lost 15,000 troops in Afghanistan. Okay, that's a lot of troops in Afghanistan. Well, Putin has lost over 15,000 pieces of artillery in Ukraine. It's just staggering numbers of losses for the Russians. When we look at some of these losses, let's look at the tank losses done by Richard Vereka from War Spotting. We can see a couple of interesting trends here. So we are seeing slightly more T-80s over time being lost, slightly more T-90s. We know that they make T-90s. There was talk about them starting to produce T-80s again, resurrecting a T-80 factory. I don't know if they're doing that. That could be why you're seeing more of these tanks, because that's what they're making. They're able to make them and then lose them, whereas these other ones, they aren't making them anymore, and so when you lose them, and you only get them back from stockpiles, and when those stockpiles start dwindling, you see the percentage, the proportion of those sorts of tanks dwindle in the loss stats. What's interesting is that this uptick, which seems to be more than just anomalous now, this is an uptick of T-62s. Now, these are the older tanks. Why would you have an uptick of losses? Well, you'll be using them all. Why are you using them all when they're suboptimal compared to, say, a T-80 or T-72 or T-90, right? T-90M. It's because you have to. Why do you have to? Because you've used up all the stockpiles of decent tanks. And so now you are refurbishing T-62s. And then you add that together with evidence of trains of T-62s coming in, that we've seen a few of those recently. We did see a T-91 yesterday, but someone mentioned that could have been from earlier in the year because all the trees were really lush green and the grass, it looked like a spring video. So, but anyway, they are producing T-90s and they are producing, it seems, T-62s from refurbished stockpiles. This, again, the picture this paints is not good for Russia. Like, what you'd want is them to be losing their best tanks, right? As in, they're losing their best tanks because they're just using their best tanks. You want them, if you were a Russian wanting to win, you want 100% of your tanks to be T-90Ms, right? So you'd want this whole list to be green. That's obviously completely unrealistic. So you're using a whole slew of different tanks. That's the reality of the nature of the beast. But the way that these trends are going are not optimal for the Russians, that's for sure. Right, they've lost, so some other videos. Here's a Pantsir S1 short-range air defense system. This is a high-value air defense system. This is a good piece of kit, one of the best Russian short-range air defense systems, taken out by a Gimler's there, and is on the wrong side of existence now. We have a catastrophic explosion of a Buk air defense system taken out by a HIMARS launched M30A1 Gimler's rocket. So the tungsten fragments take it out and it absolutely disassembles violently, and that was the end of that. Now, the reason I'm showing you these images is because I think we are starting to see more HIMARS footage coming through. Like, you get these peaks and troughs, and I think they are reflective of the supply of weaponry and ordnance. So when they have lots of HIMARS missiles, then you see more HIMARS strikes. And it's the same with, so here we have a command post in Belgorod and 2 personnel concentrations in Sumy caught on video. This is work by the Tavaz artillery crew that seem to do a pretty good job. So they're hitting some fairly high value targets, it seems, across the border into Belgorod. What else are we seeing? We're also seeing Stugna. So these are the anti-tank guided missile systems that are produced indigenously in Ukraine, where you have the launcher on a tripod and then 50 meters of wire connects you to a screen, and you have to, it's not fire and forget, so you can't like fire it and then pack up and leave. You've got to keep a laser targeting on it. Usually you see the missile go above the target and then it's brought down onto the target and eventually hits it, and it's all done through your man here and the connection to the tripod and whatnot. And anyway, there's an element of safety. So the operator here, you can fire it, and if they see the puff of smoke from firing it, the operator can still be 50 meters away. So there's an element of safety there. Now, we are seeing these again where we didn't see them. Now, what happened is these were super effective. So the time that everyone was talking about javelins, etc., actually the Stugnas appeared to be doing a better job. It could be because it's easier to film because you can film the screen. Whereas if you're a javelin on the shoulder guy, then another guy needs to be over there filming you fire that, and it's just slightly less likely that you're going to catch it on camera. Anyway, so there might be a selection bias going on there, but it certainly seemed like Stugnas were just being used all the time and super successful. Then Izium, which is where I think they made them, was captured, and then they kind of run out of stocks of the missiles, I think. They started making them again, possibly in Lviv area. And my guess, loads of speculation here, but I'm guessing that they probably got the production of the ordnance back up, and you're going to start seeing more of we are seeing more Stugna videos literally in the last 2 weeks. I'm seeing more. In the same way, I'm seeing more HIMARS videos as well. And I think that's good news. That's good news for the Ukrainians. It's anecdotal, but good. Now, bad news for the Russians. I know all of this seems to be very pro-Ukrainian. There's just not a lot of stuff that's super bad for the Ukrainians other than they're losing areas and so on and so forth. But just trying to get a handle on equipment and the losses and how that's affecting both sides. Here we have a tank that is definitely more on the Mad Max side of things here. So the question is, does this reflect things going well for you when you are building something that looks as crazy and as ad hoc as that? It's just an incredible bit of footage. Now, this might be super effective at protecting from drones. Obviously, you can't use that tank turret to do anything useful. That's not firing effectively at an enemy. So this is more just a glorified APC as far as I can make out. Now, Jay in Kiev here with typical rhetoric says, with Russian tank inventory now dwindling, so I'd agree with that part. Silly Russians are taking matters into their own hands to protect themselves from skies often black with the Ukrainian drone swarms. I wouldn't say this is silly. I would say this is needs must, and this does protect you. So, I wouldn't take the mickey out of it in that way. I always look at it from, ideally, what would the Russians be doing? Is this ideal? No, it's not ideal. Okay, well, what does this tell us? So here we've got Rob Lee talking about, actually, first of all, Jakub Janovsky from Oryx saying doing this to something like a T80 BVM instead of some garbage like a T62M or T72 Ural shows just how stupid people doing this are. I wouldn't say it's stupid. I would say this is absolute necessity. So you've got one of their better tanks being used as a mine roller with a glorified Mad Max fixtures and fittings on top, and possibly, not being able, well, I say possibly, there's no way you're using that turret effectively. You can't swing that turret at all. So either that turret can't rotate or the barrel can't fire, right? In which case, you are probably unable to fix it. Like, there's something wrong with the logistics, so you can't fix your decent tanks. Because otherwise, you would be using T62Ms, as mentioned here, to do this. Like, you take your crappiest tank. If we want to use it as a glorified APC, you use your crappiest tank and send that in. Okay, why are we using one of our best tanks? Because we can't fix it. Why can't you fix it? So whatever your explanation for this is, it's not good. Like, this is not optimal. There's no way this is optimal. So therefore, this does suggest that the Russians are in a spot of bother. And another example of how they're in a spot of bother is, and I've talked about the psychological effects of drones, about how after this war there'll be thousands of people on both sides with PTSD that gets triggered every time they hear a buzzing sound, a sound of a drone. It must be horrific. You've heard, anecdotes of Russians, and I'm sure this will be the same for Ukrainians, of not being able to come out of their dugouts until nighttime, for a WAZ or a smoko. They have to stay inside because of the fear of being hit by drones. And here we have a video, and I didn't watch a video, but I saw it If you get my meaning, I didn't watch it. I think I saw the beginning of him walking. Anyway, just saw a video of an FPV drone flying near a Russian soldier who immediately takes his rifle and shoots himself through the chest. This was a healthy soldier, not one wounded in the trench waiting for evac that isn't coming. The psychological effect of these drones is insane. Maybe that one I saw, but anyway, there's another one. Yeah, you see some terrible things, right? Don't go looking for them. But this is reflective of an absolute sense of hopelessness. Like, as a Russian soldier in this case, you are thinking there's more. Well, no, there is no chance of me surviving. So I'm hearing the drone, I'm seeing the drone, I'm going to die. I want to take my life. I'm going to have to control the taking my life away from me rather than having that thing blow my arms off or something. And so, wow, how depressing that is, how horrific war is. It really, really is. Right, onto distance strikes and whatnot. 25 drones were shot down out of 38, and 3 others went over the Romanian border and crashed into Romanian territory. So that's 10 out of 38 weren't shot down. Sometimes there are numbers of drones that are still taken out by electronic warfare. So I don't know that all 10 would have been hitting their target or near their target. Nonetheless, that's not the best interception rate. We've had some really good interception rates recently, but Russians, that's a fairly big wave of drones for them. 38. Odessa, Kherson, Mykolaiv, Kiev, Zhytomyr, Cherkasy oblasts, and then obviously Romania hit there. So there's a video of one of the drones hitting in Romania. Ukrainian forces reported that Russian Shahed drones entered Romanian airspace. A video appeared showing the crash site of one of them. The increasing number of those incidents are most likely attempts to test NATO's resolve and preparedness. I don't know. Is it Hannon's razor? Don't attribute a malice to something that can better be explained by cock up, right? I would more probably think this was just crappy drone settings or operation. I don't know that it's a good idea. Even the Russians surely aren't going to be like, oh, should we just send some drones into Romania and see how much we can piss them off? I don't think that ends well at all for the Russians. So that's my reading. I could be wrong. Kursk. So before that happened last night, there was lots of activity in Kursk from Ukrainian drones. Don't know any details about what's been hit or hasn't been hit. Explosions in Russia's Kursk as Ukrainian drones appeared over the city. Russian air defenses were activated in the area. So it was very there was a lot of activity in Kursk last night. So this is an interesting video, and I don't quite know how to interpret this. So Anton Gerashchenko says Russian soldiers expressively comment on the explosion of their ammunition cache in a village occupied by them in eastern Ukraine. It's impossible to translate this, so no subtitles. Is that why they were restricted from using phones? So we hear this these proclamations from the MOD, Russian MOD, that you can't use gadgets on the front line. They don't want video feed getting out that makes it look like things are bad and that they're having losses. This is just a weird one. So you've got the Ukrainians successfully blowing up a Russian ammo depot or something, and you've got Ukrainians being super happy. Russian soldiers, actual soldiers here, being super happy about it.
Ебучий сыр, нахуй, все, сука, горит, нахуй. Из-за одной блядской FPV, нахуй. Просто, сука, все из-за одной блядской FPV, блядь. Салам алейкум. Священная наша. Пизда.
I mean, I don't know whether they're drunk or what, but like, rock and roll, yeah, all right, massive explosion of my own stuff. I just, I'm not quite sure what that tells us, but I'm fairly sure it's not great for the Russians. Now, something that is not celebrated enough, the complete success of the Ukrainians in the Black Sea in terms of getting rid of the Russian Black Sea fleet, right? They have been removed from the port of Sevastopol. The Russian Black Sea fleet is now hanging out in Novorossiysk, the port on the Georgian coast that they're building at the moment, and probably just moored out in the middle of nowhere. As a result of the train ferry being taken out yesterday, the Slavyanin, all Russian warships have now left the Sea of Azov. So think Crimea, think of that top right of Crimea, northeast that sea there that's in between Russia, Crimea, and Ukrainian sort of Berdyansk and Mariupol and Taganrog over there. That's the Sea of Azov. There are no Russian warships there anymore. They've been, apparently, according to Pletenchuk, the Navy spokesman, this was caused primarily by the damage to the railway ferry. They took a map and a compass and decided that it was probably not very safe for them to stay there. This is the only language our enemy understands, the language of power. Interesting, and it's just a real success for the Ukrainians that isn't celebrated enough in the mainstream media. The second greatest army in the world, or second greatest armed force of the world, has had to remove their ships from Sevastopol and from the Sea of Azov. Okay, I've talked a lot about metrics of success. I talked previously about this pyramid where your major goal is to get the Russians out of your entire country, right? 1991 borders. That's your number one objective, right? And that is at the top. But actually, at an awful lot of points during this war, it's not that important, because in order to get to that point, you need to achieve all these other things. And the achieving of all these other things does not necessitate taking territory back. So you get this weird scenario where we need to take all our territory back, but in order to do that, there might be some points in this war where we lose territory in order to eventually get it all back. What I mean by this is that there are these other objectives that therefore have their own metrics of success, such as attriting Russian materiel, personnel, air defense, aircraft. You want economic sanctions, you want political influence. All these things are objectives that will have different metrics of success. Now, you could lose areas. I talk about Chasiv Yar, but you could even, I'm not saying this is the case, I'm saying hypothetically this could be the case, that even losing all of that land in Pokrovsk at the moment, which is really challenging for the Ukrainians, if that's being done at such a cost for the Russians, it's like a Pyrrhic victory, right? They are expending all of their personnel and equipment to the point where they exhaust themselves. You can say, yeah, by all means, take these square kilometers at a huge expense to you. And then once that has taken its effect, we'll be able to then achieve the thing at the top. Like F-16s come along, we get some localized air superiority, your air defenses are taken out, you've attrited all, just by military harakiri, you've attrited all your own material and personnel, you're having problems mobilizing, we're now going to take all that stuff back. So there are these different metrics that will eventually feed into the overall objective of taking back territory. So Maria Popova here says there's undue emphasis on territorial concessions. The war isn't about territory but about Ukrainian sovereignty. Ukraine won't accept losing it. Russia still wants to end it. The fate of some territories is hugely important to those living there but doesn't hold the key to the war's end. Now this is going into the political realm where you've had some surveys that have come out that say the number of Ukrainians opposed to territorial concessions to Russia in exchange for peace has continued to fall in recent months, reaching 55% in May, according to a poll released by the Kyiv International Institute for Sociology. So there is this idea that okay, we will be happier to concede territory. It's like Donbass is always going to be a difficult one. Crimea, the fate of Crimea, where's that going to be? So there are two things going on. There's my military understanding of like territory isn't everything, but it is everything. And then there's also the public opinion as to whether territory can be exchanged for peace. But in the military sense, this is precisely where I'm going, because according to the National Guard commander Pivnenko, Russia will soon be unable to conduct active assaults on many fronts and will transition to a defensive stance within a month, according to National Guard commander. He urged the need for the AFU to form units, prepare and identify weak points. So there is going to be this switch into defense where the Russians are just going to run out. When we look at all of these data points, the loss statistics, and then you look at track guard and sheds, yes, they are losing in Pokrovsk and in these different areas. It's really tough for the Ukrainians. They're exhausted, they don't have enough troops. So the problem is the Ukrainians are really stretched too thin and don't have enough material and personnel, but the Russians don't either. And every data point we look at suggests that when you look at the lost proportions of variants of tanks like we've just seen, and you're thinking, this is not looking good for Russia. Track garden sheds made out of T-80 BVMs, golf buggies being used, motorcycles being used, untrained soldiers being used up in Kharkiv by the Russians. They don't have food, they don't have water. There are all these things, and yeah, it's all like positive for Russia, for Ukraine, but yet Ukraine are also suffering. But the point is that how long can Russia keep doing this? Well, you've now got Ukrainian commanders saying they will have culminated within a month. And remember, this is supposed to be the very worst time for the Ukrainians. Everyone had predicted that July and August was going to be the worst period. And it could be that the Russians culminate sooner than people were expecting. You'd expect them to go and fight into the autumn when it eventually they get too bogged down. Well, it could end sooner than that, at least according to this military source. We'll see. Now, this is being reported widely. I almost did it yesterday, but I was a bit unsure. But actually, it seems to be fairly genuine. So there's now ample evidence that Russia is harvesting the organs of Ukrainian prisoners of war. So during the prisoner exchanges, you also get dead body exchanges. So you'll have like 96 prisoners have been exchanged in the latest one, and everyone's surrounded by flags, and it's all lovely. But with that often comes like a load of coffins or dead bodies that are swapped, that they've picked up dead bodies and they picked up dead bodies, and yeah, let's get them reconciled. But apparently a number of the dead bodies coming back from the Russian side, i.e. Ukrainians, have come back without organs. Representatives of the government of Ukraine and the families of Ukrainian POWs have appealed to the Turkish government requesting intervention. So during exchanges, Russian returns bodies without internal organs, according to relatives of the prisoners of war. The return of Ukraine to Ukraine of the bodies of POWs without internal organs may be evidence that they are being used in Russia for transplantation. This was discussed at a meeting in Ankara of representatives of the families of prisoners of war with the extraordinary and plenipotentiary ambassador of Ukraine to Turkey, Vasil Bodnar, and the correspondent of Ukrinform reports. So this is being reported more formally now, and it's not good news. Then when you hear stuff like this, a Ukrainian prisoner of war was shot in the knee for answering in Ukrainian. The other Ukrainian POWs were threatened with execution for speaking Ukrainian and were forced to speak Russian at gunpoint. Russia wants to erase Ukrainian identity. This should serve as a reminder as to why and how Ukrainian language is incredibly important for Ukrainian national identity. Russia understands that to erase Ukrainian language is key to erasing Ukrainian ethnicity. Linguicide for genocide, age-old Russian crime. I found it interesting reading both Aidan Aslan's book and Sean Pinner's book, and their experiences of being in captivity and what the Russians do in there. And yeah, it's absolutely par for the course. Alongside this, trying to eradicate, or as part, not alongside this, another example of trying to eradicate Ukrainian identity is what they're doing in places like Zaporizhia. So there have been reports that Putin is very keen on expediting the transition of these places to being fully Russian, right? And an example of that, so that I didn't report that over the last couple of days, but that was coming out from the Kremlin. Russia is forming 12 organizations to militarize children in occupied parts of Zaporizhia. Russia's launched 12 youth propagandistic movements to militarize Ukrainian children in partially occupied Zaporizhia Oblast, Ukrinform reported yesterday, citing the head of local police. This is a form of brainwashing where you make entire cohorts of people, you Russianize them, you Russify them. And eventually when Ukraine wants that territory back, then you ask all the people there, including the children, who would you rather be? And they'd say, well, they've even been pulled in from Russia, or they've grown up over 10 years being brainwashed to be Russian. And you do a referendum, there's like, oh, who knew that they'd still want to remain part of Russia? So you steal an area and then you repopulate it, and those who are left, you just brainwash. You forget their parents, you concentrate on the children, and by 10, 15 years later, you've turned a place Russian. The Russians have deployed about 30 barges to protect the Crimean Bridge, but this will not hinder the main objective of the Ukrainian armed forces, according to the spokesman Serhiy Paratchuk. He stated that the bridge will be destroyed in accordance with Ukrainian legislation, so there's a lot of defence of the bridge. They've been working on that for some time now. And talking about the Russian economy, this is just Iziasz Kommersant, the Russian Actually, this is not an exiled Russian media source. This is from inside Russia. Quote, there are no new growth factors and the old ones have exhausted themselves. There's a strong drawdown not only in oil, but also in its refining and in other processing sectors. The food industry, chemistry, mechanical engineering, there is no growth. The probable increase in the rate will still work in the negative, expects Vladimir Stalnikov from CMAS. The Russian economy, it does look to be somewhat creaking. Anyway, thanks for watching. Really appreciate your support. Take care. Speak to you soon.